So, if there's any chance that you're going to go see this movie in theaters or watch it on demand or otherwise obtain a copy of it, then I would recommend you come back to this review later because there's probably going to be spoilers in it. And it is a film I'd really recommend. Furthermore, unlike some other movies, particularly horror movies, there was actually a lot of things in this film that surprised me. I didn't know where it was going exactly in the first 5 minutes of it. I didn't even wasn't even sure if it was a supernatural film, if it was a psychological thriller. I went into this movie not really knowing anything about it, and even up to like half an hour into the film or about halfway through the movie, I still wasn't sure exactly like what the background was, what was happening, what the reveal was going to be, that sort of thing. This film is really good at throwing curveballs and red herrings and stuff like that to kind of keep things ambiguous and mysterious. But it does it in a good way. When it throws in a red herring or a curveball or something, it makes sense within the context. And while it may mislead you as a viewer, you have to keep in mind that the main character is also being misled. And I think that's kind of part of the meta experience of watching this film is you're as misled as the main character is. You're trying to sort your way through all these different theories and tropes and stuff like that. And your thought process is more or less mirroring hers, which is something very refreshing. This horror movie was actually scary, was actually interesting, and was actually kind of refreshing because I couldn't, like I said, tell how it was going to end in the first 5 minutes of the film. And how it ultimately ended was a bit of a surprise to me. So I would give this film 2 thumbs up. Really good horror movie, would highly recommend it. But that being said, let's kind of get into the plot. So the film starts out with our main character, Beth. Now, an interesting thing about this film is there's only like 5 characters in it. There's Beth, who's the main character. There's her best friend. There's her husband. There's the black neighbor. And then there's this girl at a bookstore. And I think there's also a clerk at the bookstore and some parent. But there's very few characters in this movie. And that's something I often like. In a lot of cases, I'd rather them have as few as characters as possible and just give them more screen time rather than just kind of shove a whole bunch of stuff in there and not have any development or not spend any time building attachments to people. Some people can do ensembles where you have a whole bunch of different memorable characters and manage them. But generally speaking, if you're not the kind of person who has the talent for that, it's probably better to go with a smaller cast. So the movie begins with Beth, who at the start of the movie, her husband has committed suicide with a gun she didn't even know he owns. And he left behind a very ambiguous message. There is nothing, nothing is after you, you're safe now. And she's not exactly sure what it's referring to, at least at first. And very early on in the movie, she starts having what seem to be supernatural events. Now, the movie, I don't think really clearly establishes that any of this is supernatural until very late in the film, as this could all just be like a product of her delusional mind. Most of the stuff that happens is given the appearance of a dream or her sleepwalking or something like that. It can be explained by the extreme stress, her alcohol dependency that's built up after her husband dying. And it is kind of very ambiguous for a lot of the movie. Is something supernatural going on? Is something not? And that's a problem I have with a lot of found footage films, is that it's established in like the first 5 minutes that there's something supernatural. It's not ambiguous at all. And there's no tension after that. So her best friend tries to comfort her. And there is a bit of a red herring. Maybe I was the only one who caught it, or maybe it wasn't even intentional. I thought for a minute that like one of the plot twists was going to be that her husband was sleeping with her best friend just because of the way her best friend described her husband. She's like, whatever you find out about your husband from this, keep in mind that he loved you and loved you dearly, and that you shouldn't go digging into his past. So it made it sound like that she knew something about him and they had an affair or something. Now that didn't wind up going anywhere, but I liked that it was a red herring, and it was a logical red herring. and that it actually kind of fooled me for a while. And that happens a couple different times throughout this movie, which is something that is really good. So she tells her best friend that there is a time a couple of years ago where she died for 4 minutes and nothing was there. Really, the only bad aspect of this movie is how nothing is actually something, and this gets into some like new atheist debate about the origin of the universe. But we can get into that later. So she begins to have visions of a house at the exact other side of the lake that looks exactly like her house that her husband is taking women to. And in some of her dreams, it's complete, and some of them it's not. She runs into her black neighbor who says that he caught her husband out with another woman who looked just like her one night, but he never saw him again. And that he told the neighbor about having urges that he couldn't control and that he was trying to find a solution to dealing with. Likewise, she goes through his belongings and finds some articles about trapping and controlling spirits. So at this point in the movie, you're not really sure where it's going. Could this whole thing just be a nothing burger? Could it all just be something completely innocent? Her husband wasn't cheating on her. Nothing was going on. This is just kind of a delusion in her trying to cope with a exceedingly tragic event. Could it be that her husband was having an affair on her, taking women to like some abandoned house on the other side of the lake, but there's nothing supernatural or really nefarious going on besides simple adultery? Could it be that her husband is a serial killer and is killing these women because he's nuts, and the supernatural aspect is once again just her imagining things? Or could it be that there is a supernatural presence involved with this? So it is very much ambiguous at this point in time. So as she continues her investigation and things get kind of crazier and crazier, she goes through his computer and she finds all these pictures of women who look just like her. And she eventually is able to find the house on the other side of the lake. And she looks under the floorboards and finds the corpses of all the women in the photos in body bags. So it's looking like her husband's a serial killer. And that's kind of going to be the big twist. That it was toxic masculinity, that he was maybe that he did love her and he was killing these other women so he didn't have to kill her or something like that. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but it looks like it's going in that direction. So after this revelation, she starts feeling this spirit chasing after her, and she thinks that it's her her husband, and she embraces it and thinks that he's come back for her. And then it explicitly tells her, "I'm not Owen. I'm nothing." So nothing is a demon that she met during her near-death experience. So she didn't see nothing, she met a demon which she named nothing. So it's not nothing, it's an it named nothing. So I don't know if it's supposed to be like a personification of the void, or it's an idea that hell awaits, or it's like if it's supposed to be the human fear of death when there's no afterlife. But regardless, there is a demon that's behind all of this that wants her back. Because he briefly was with her and he wants her to come back to his realm, hell or whatever it is. And nothing has been trying to possess her husband and get him to kill her so that he can be with her again. And he's been fooling the demon by building the look-alike of their house and killing similar women to her to feed as sacrifices to nothing. But he eventually figured out the trick. And Owen realizes he can't keep killing women, so he opts to kill himself before the demon will possess him fully and make him kill his wife. We have like a really surreal thing where she goes through a bunch of different scenes and sees her husband killing various women and all this other stuff. We get kind of a final confrontation scene where the demon tries to convince her to join in and shoot herself in the head. Her best friend shows up though and pulls her out of it and goes back to staring at the outline of the demon on the boat. And then her friend asks what is it? And she says it's nothing. So overall, I gotta say it was a very good movie. I really enjoyed it. I was on the edge of the seat a lot of the film. It was fun. Well, I guess if you call a horror movie film, but I wasn't really sure where it was going, if it was going to be supernatural or not, what angle they were going to take. Highly recommend the movie. Definitely one of the better horror movies I've seen in quite some time. So definitely would recommend it. Give it a chance. God bless, and I'll talk to you guys later.